From now on, you will be living with us. You will be our housekeeper. Do not act like you do not know. My name is Laura, and I am married to Daniel. We have what most people would call an ideal marriage, the kind that others admire. I had always thought I got along well with his parents too, but lately, things have been feeling off. I have not mentioned anything to Daniel yet. I do not want to stress him out, so for now, I am just keeping an eye on things. During dinner one evening, Daniel brought up an idea. How about we take a trip on our next day off? I immediately perked up. That sounds great. It has been raining a lot lately, and the forecast looks good for our day off. We tossed around ideas and eventually settled on a morning of sightseeing followed by a relaxing afternoon at a spa. Just thinking about it gave me extra motivation to push through the work week. When the day finally came, we had everything packed and ready to go. Just as we were about to leave, Daniel's phone rang. He answered, his face shifting from excitement to concern. What? I understand. Laura and I will be there right away. When he hung up, I asked what happened. It is my dad, he said. He collapsed. We rushed to the hospital, only to find Daniel's mother casually sitting in the waiting area with his father. She greeted us with a cheerful, "Oh my, you got here fast." Daniel and I exchanged glances. When we asked how his father was doing, his mother chuckled. It was just a pulled muscle in his back. What a scare, right? Relief washed over us, but it quickly turned into exhaustion. We had canceled our entire trip, thinking it was an emergency, only to find them sitting there like nothing serious had happened. Take us home, his mother said. We came by taxi. Daniel agreed, but I could not hold back my frustration. I thought you said he collapsed? He could not move because of the pain, she explained. I was so worried I called a cab. After dropping them off, Daniel and I tried to salvage what was left of our day. His mother overheard us discussing it and immediately inserted herself into the conversation. You are really going to go out when your father is suffering? She scolded. That would be very inconsiderate. Her reaction made no sense to me, and my irritation boiled over. It felt like she was just looking for ways to control us. Before we could leave, she asked me to help with housework while we were there. I could not refuse, so I ended up spending the day at their house. Later that night, Daniel apologized, though it was not his fault. We can go another time, I assured him. Back home, we ordered takeout and tried to shake off the frustrating day. As we ate, I finally voiced my thoughts. Your parents were being pretty awful today, Daniel sighed. I know. It felt like they were doing it on purpose. We vented our frustrations and agreed to try again on our next day off. But when the day came, the same thing happened. Then again, the following week. Every single time, his parents would call with some excuse or demand, preventing us from going anywhere. One evening, Daniel sat beside me on the couch. I told them we will not be available next time. No matter what, we are going. I was happy he was standing firm, but I also worried about the conflict it might cause. Are you sure? Daniel grinned. I feel like we barely get any time to ourselves anymore. It is okay to say no sometimes. I hugged him, excited at the thought of finally having our day together. Then, the night before our next day off, his parents showed up at our house unannounced. We thought it would be nice to stay over, his mother said. And tomorrow, let us all go out together. Daniel was firm. I told you, Laura and I already have plans. His father waved it off. That is fine. We will come too. Daniel hesitated but eventually explained. We just wanted to spend time as a couple since we have not had much time alone. His mother ignored that entirely. Well, I feel like eating something good. And I want to go shopping. That sounds great. His father agreed. I could use a new pillow anyway. Without asking, they decided we would be going to a department store with them instead. Daniel sighed, already looking exhausted. I could tell he wanted to refuse, but deep down, he knew it would be a losing battle. It was clear Daniel's parents were not going to let it go, so I gave in. Daniel apologized, but I was furious. They had completely hijacked our plans for their own convenience. I wanted to snap and tell them, if you want to go to the department store so badly, why not go on your own? But instead, I swallowed my frustration and let out a sigh. I am really sorry, Daniel said. Who knows when we will finally get to take a proper trip together? It is fine, I replied, though I did not really mean it. Maybe we should take a few weekdays off instead. That way, your parents will not interfere. Daniel's face brightened. That is actually a great idea. For now, we decided to just go along with his parents' plans. The next day, at the department store, we quickly realized this was not just a casual shopping trip. His parents took forever to decide on things, and when they finally did, they started dropping hints for Daniel and me to buy them what they wanted. At first, I thought maybe they were joking, but they kept pushing. And these were not small, inexpensive items. They expected us to pay for expensive things too. It hit me then, maybe this had been their plan all along. My frustration turned into pure disbelief. Who did they think we were? Their personal bank? When we firmly said no, they got upset. In the end, we caved and bought them each one item just to stop the endless complaining. Even so, they sulked the whole way home. Back at our place, Daniel and I collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. What has gotten into them? He muttered. They were never like this before. I sighed. At least they are healthy. Even though I had every reason to complain, I held back, not wanting to add to Daniel's stress. That night, we went to bed earlier than usual, both mentally exhausted. After that, the phone calls from his parents became constant. It felt like they were taking up more and more of our time. One day, I noticed Daniel looking pale and exhausted. I suggested he see a doctor, but he brushed it off. I am fine, he insisted. I did not believe him. Worried, I took over all the household chores and made sure to cook him healthy meals. He gave me a weak smile and muttered an apology, but something was clearly wrong. A few days later, he collapsed during a checkup at the hospital. Panic set in as I rushed to help him. The doctors and nurses immediately sprang into action. My heart pounded as I watched him being taken away. My hands felt cold, my whole body shaking. He will be okay, I told myself over and over. He has to be okay. When he regained consciousness, he looked a little better, which gave me some relief. But then the doctor suggested further testing. Daniel wanted to refuse, but I insisted. Eventually, he gave in. Since he needed to stay overnight, I went home to pack his things. I also contacted his workplace to explain what had happened. His colleagues were very concerned and told me to assure him that his job would be waiting for him. My own workplace was also understanding, giving me time off to be with him. Then came the test results. Daniel did not have much time left. The doctor's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I could not breathe. My mind went blank. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that this was some kind of mistake. But the doctor kept talking, and I could not process anything he was saying. Daniel, on the other hand, accepted the news much faster than I did. I stayed by his side every day, refusing to leave him alone. Somehow, I managed to force out the words to explain the situation to our companies. Both gave me extended leave. When I told his parents, they rushed to the hospital. At first, they seemed genuinely worried. But then, while I was out buying snacks, they followed me and dropped a bombshell. So, his mother asked, whose name is on the house? How much property is there to divide when he is gone? I froze, staring at them in disbelief. Please do not say things like that, I said, barely holding back my anger. He could still recover. His mother gave me a dismissive look. We are just thinking about your future. Even they seemed to realize they had crossed a line. Their expressions turned awkward. Then, as if nothing had happened, they started adding snacks to my shopping basket and walked off, without taking out their wallets. I paid with a sigh. It seemed like I had no choice. After that, Daniel's parents started showing up at the hospital nearly every day. Soon enough, they began asking for money, claiming they needed help covering transportation and missed work. When I told them they did not need to come so often since I was already there, they acted insulted. "We are just worried," they insisted. Daniel apologized, but I did not want to add to his stress. So, I forced a smile and told him not to worry. Arguing with his parents would only make things worse for him. They must have noticed I never refused them in front of Daniel, because soon, they started making their demands whenever he was around. It was calculated, but I kept quiet. His health mattered more than my pride. "At this point, you should be offering us money before we even have to ask," his mother said one day. I nearly lost it. My hands clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. Instead of snapping, I just nodded and muttered an apology. Their behavior only got worse. They showed no gratitude, no shame, just endless demands. "I guess you are just the kind of woman who does not think ahead," his mother scoffed. "But we will let it slide this time." I had never been so close to exploding. For Daniel's sake, I bit my tongue. But I could feel my patience running out. And then, not long after, Daniel passed away. "Meeting you made my life a great success," he told me with a weak smile. "Thank you for all the love and happiness." Those were his last words. I could not get that moment out of my head. It felt unreal, like he would walk through the door at any second. But when I stepped into our now silent home after the funeral, reality crushed me. I collapsed at the entrance, sobbing. Memories of our life together flooded my mind. The grief was suffocating. For a brief moment, I even wondered if it would be easier to just follow him. Guilt, sadness, anger, it all mixed together. Part of me resented Daniel for leaving me behind. Eventually, the tears stopped. I stumbled into the living room, still dazed. Even then, I swore I could hear his voice. Needing a distraction, I decided to go through the things we had brought back from the hospital. As I sorted through the bag, I found an envelope buried at the bottom. Curious, I opened it. It was a letter from Daniel. "Laura, by the time you read this, I am probably already gone. I never imagined I would have to write something like this. I am sorry I cannot be by your side forever. If things were reversed, I know I would be heartbroken, so I can only imagine how you must feel. But I need you to know, you are not alone. I have more gratitude than I can ever express. Thank you for standing by me. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for loving me. Every moment with you was worth it." Tears streamed down my face. He had not wanted to leave. If anyone had been the most frustrated by this, it was him. I had been so consumed by my own pain that I had not stopped to think about how he must have felt. There were faint water stains on the paper. Had he cried while writing this? I hugged the letter to my chest. I had lost so much, but dwelling on it would not help me move forward. I had to be strong. Toward the end of the letter, Daniel had written, "I am sorry for all the trouble my parents caused you." He had been worried about them the whole time. Even after everything, I could not let him down. I took a deep breath and lightly slapped my cheeks, forcing myself to focus. Facing his photo, I whispered, "Thank you for this, Daniel. I will keep going. Watch over me." That letter gave me the push I needed. I finally called back the friends and colleagues who had been worried about me. Then, I made a decision. After taking a long break, I returned to work. To my surprise, I felt more stable than I had expected. My coworkers were incredibly kind, making sure I was not overwhelmed. One weekend, I decided to visit my parents for a few days. They greeted me with warm smiles, and even without words, I knew they had been deeply worried. I spent a few peaceful days with them, finally allowing myself to breathe. On my last day there, I promised to visit again soon before heading home. But when I arrived back, I was met with a nightmare. My house was gone. The entire building had been demolished. For a moment, I thought I had driven to the wrong place. But no, that was impossible. I stood frozen, my mind completely blank. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Oh, you finally came back." I turned around to see Daniel's parents standing there. In that instant, I knew exactly who was responsible for this. I gritted my teeth. What is the meaning of this? I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. What is this supposed to mean? Daniel's father chuckled. From now on, you will be living with us. We are making you our housekeeper. You will take care of the household expenses too. I stared at them, barely processing what I had just heard. They had demolished my house, Daniel's and mine, to force me into servitude. My anger boiled over. What have you done? That was our home. His mother smirked. Your house? Might as well have been ours since you are moving in with us. No need to keep it, right? Their words were so absurd I was momentarily speechless. Any lingering sense of obligation toward them vanished. These people were heartless. Their son had only been gone a short while, and they felt nothing. I had tolerated them for Daniel's sake. Now, I had no reason to hold back. Speechless? Overwhelmed with joy at your new role? His father teased. I am thinking of having gourmet meals every day. Might even renovate the house. I took a deep breath. How did you even get permission to demolish the house? His mother waved a hand dismissively. We had a friend take care of it. Knew us for years, so they did it right away. I laughed. I could not help it. They had no idea what they had just done. What is so funny? His father's smile faltered. I crossed my arms. You two destroyed a house that was legally mine. Are you ready to take responsibility for that? Their smug expressions disappeared. That is a lie. His mother's voice wavered. The house was in Daniel's name. We will sue you for defamation. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of the deed. Daniel transferred ownership to me while he was in the hospital. Just in case. Their faces drained of color. You are still part of this family, so it does not matter. His father grasped for control. I shook my head. Actually, no. I have legally severed ties with you. They blinked, confused. What does that even mean? I sighed. I filed for termination of in-law status. We are strangers now. The reality finally hit them. Their faces twisted in horror. Then, what are we supposed to do? His father looked panicked. I already quit my job, expecting you to take care of us. My stomach twisted with disgust. That was their plan? To force me into becoming their financial support? I glanced at them with an icy stare. Well, since I no longer have a place to live, you will need to move out of yours. They recoiled. You are trying to steal our home? His mother screeched. You just said we are strangers. I let out a slow breath. Not steal. The house is in my name too. Silence. Daniel had bought their house years ago, and he had quietly transferred it to me as well. His mother's lips trembled. You cannot do this. His father turned red with anger. This is defamation. I barely heard them over the sound of approaching footsteps. Neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Many had attended Daniel's funeral. Now they stood with arms crossed, listening as I explained what had happened. The outrage was immediate. How could you do this to her? Unbelievable! You people are disgusting! The humiliation was too much for them. They fled without another word. I exhaled, finally feeling the weight lift. The neighbors comforted me, offering support. One woman placed a hand on my shoulder. You are not alone. If you need anything, just ask. I nodded, touched by their kindness. But reality was still harsh. With my house gone, all my belongings were destroyed. I went shopping for necessities, clothes, toiletries, a new phone charger. Then I called my workplace to explain the situation. To my surprise, my boss was incredibly understanding. We will send you a new computer, he assured me. And do not worry about your in-laws. Our lawyers will be handling this. I felt a lump in my throat. I am really sorry for the trouble. This is not your fault, he said firmly. If you need anything, just let us know. That night, I checked into a hotel near my workplace. I had planned to stay there until I could find a new apartment. But the next morning, my supervisor called me into his office. Hotel costs add up fast. Why do you not stay in the company's housing for now? I was stunned. You would do that for me? He smiled. It is the least we can do. Later that night, I moved into a fully furnished apartment provided by the company. It had everything I needed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. As I sat down to plan my next steps, my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach twist. It was my mother-in-law. I took a deep breath and answered. Oh, have you decided when you will be moving out? I asked coolly. She exploded. Do you not realize how difficult this is for us? I rolled my eyes. Difficult for you? You demolished my house. That does not matter, she shrieked. I gritted my teeth. It matters to me. Before I could say more, she spat out something absolutely ridiculous. If you apologize now, I will forgive you. You still owe us. My mother-in-law sneered. Even if we are strangers now, you have a debt of gratitude for all we have done for you. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Them taking care of me? The thought alone was infuriating. After everything I had endured, they actually believed they were entitled to my help. I was about to refuse outright, but an idea struck me. Fine. I will not be supporting you financially, but I will settle my debt of gratitude. Her expression twisted. What do you mean you won't support us? We have no money because my husband quit his job. How do you expect us to live? I shrugged. Not my problem. Quitting was his choice, wasn't it? Fuming, she shoved the phone to her husband. Do you really have no compassion for your in-laws? He demanded. I exhaled sharply. I have told you before, we are not family anymore. And frankly, I would cut ties completely if I could. But first, you have to take responsibility for demolishing my house. There was silence on the other end, though I could hear my mother-in-law yelling in the background. I smirked. This was karma. Then she was back on the phone. Then what do you mean by repaying your debt? Oh, it is simple, I said lightly. I will sell the house you are living in. Or, if you prefer, you can rent it from me. $1,000 a month seems fair. Dead silence. She finally grasped what it meant to be living in a house that was not hers. A moment later, the line went dead. I shook my head and called my lawyer. I considered demolishing their house too, but Daniel's photos and personal belongings were still inside. I had to get those back. Through my company, I was introduced to a lawyer who immediately took action. Then my phone rang again. What are you thinking, bringing a lawyer into this? My mother-in-law shrieked. Oh, I have handed everything over to the lawyer, I replied coolly. Please do not contact me again. Wait. I hung up before she could finish. When they switched to emails, I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Soon after, their messages stopped altogether. According to my lawyer, however, they were being difficult, throwing tantrums and refusing to cooperate. This might take some time, he admitted, shaking his head. I had expected as much. That's fine. I am not backing down. He smiled. Good. Neither are we. A few days later, my in-laws, frustrated that they could not reach me, stormed into my workplace. Where is she? They shouted as they barged in. Heads turned as my disheveled in-laws marched through the office, wearing dirty clothes and reeking of sweat. Colleagues who knew the situation immediately stepped in to block their way. Please leave, one of them insisted. My in-laws pushed past them and beelined straight for me. We told you to give us money, my mother-in-law wailed. Look at us. Do you feel nothing seeing us like this? I stayed silent, staring at them in disgust. Then she played her final card. Daniel must be crying in heaven. She sniffled dramatically, saying, was she really such a heartless woman? That was it. I slammed my desk. The entire office fell silent. My in-laws flinched. "He is crying," I said, my voice low. Crying about how pathetic his parents turned out to be. Their faces contorted with rage. "How dare you! You used him!" I cut them off. "Even when he was in the hospital, all you cared about was money. He did everything for you. He was a good son. And this is how you repay him?" They stepped back, caught off guard. The whispers in the office grew louder. Then, a new voice joined in. So these are the ones who destroyed the computer." My department head strode over with a smile. A chilling smile. He stopped beside me and turned to my in-laws. "Hello?" he greeted pleasantly. "We have been expecting you. Currently, we are working with our lawyer to seek damages for the destruction of company property. You will be receiving legal claims soon. Please be prepared." The color drained from their faces. "What? Why, we are discussing compensation," he continued. "And you will be held accountable." Panic flickered in their eyes. Suddenly, they realized they were trapped. Their heads whipped around as they took in the cold stares of my coworkers. Without another word, they turned and bolted. Afterward, my boss and coworkers checked in on me. I apologized for the disturbance, but they reassured me. "You have been through enough," one colleague said. "We support you," another added. A few days later, my lawyer called. "They have agreed to move out of the house," he informed me. "And they will pay damages for illegally demolishing your home." I let out a slow breath. It was over. Shortly after, I retrieved Daniel's photos and belongings. But I could not live in that house, not after what they had done. So, I put it up for sale. Then, I started a new plan. I reached out to the housing company that had built my original home. "I want to rebuild," I told them. "Same place, but single story this time." As I discussed designs, I found myself excited. Maybe I would get a dog. Things were finally looking up. Until I got a call from my mother. "Laura, we have a problem." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" she sighed. "Your in-laws came here." I gripped the phone tighter. "What?" "They barged in, screaming about how you kicked them out and that we should take responsibility." Rage burned through me. "Call the police," I said immediately. She hesitated. "Your father is talking to them right now. If they do not leave soon, I will call." I grabbed my car keys. "I am coming over." I hung up and sped to my childhood home. As I pulled into the driveway, I could hear yelling from inside. Without knocking, I burst through the front door. "What the hell do you think you are doing to my parents?" I demanded. My in-laws spun around. My father-in-law looked frail, his clothes unkempt, but the moment he saw me, he lunged forward, blaming everything on me. My father immediately stepped between us, blocking him. "We're calling the police," I said firmly to my mother. She hesitated. "Why?" I pressed. She sighed. "Before I called you, I called your brother." That explained it. I had one brother, and if my mother had reached out to him, I understood why she was reluctant to involve the police. My father must have felt the same way. He had held back for the same reason. Realizing this, I decided to handle it myself for now. My in-laws had dug their own graves. To pay the compensation to me and my company, they had borrowed money. But it wasn't enough. So, they turned to relatives. When they failed to repay, the family cut them off. But cutting ties didn't erase the debt. Now they were drowning. And somehow, they convinced themselves this was all my fault. Since they couldn't reach me, they decided to dump the responsibility on my parents instead. I stared at them, completely unimpressed. "This is your own doing." My mother-in-law exploded. "Shut up!" she shrieked, then suddenly burst into tears. "If you want us to apologize, fine, we will," she wailed. "So give back the money we paid." The moment I told her that was impossible, she collapsed onto the floor, pounding it like a child throwing a tantrum. My father sighed. My mother just tilted her head. Oh dear. You should help people who are struggling right in front of you, my father-in-law shouted, rubbing his wife's back. I laughed. You have the nerve to ask for help after everything you did to Daniel and me? Just then, the front door opened. A familiar voice rang out. I'm home. My in-law's head snapped toward the entrance. My mother-in-law's fake tears vanished instantly. And then, my brother walked in. He smiled. Oh, so these are the people who made life hell for Rachel and Daniel. The room fell silent. My brother is tall, broad-shouldered, and has a naturally intimidating face. My in-laws visibly shrank. You're late, my mother said flatly. Please take them away. Stand up, my brother ordered. My in-laws fidgeted. Take us where? My father-in-law asked nervously. My brother smirked. I heard you need money. I'll introduce you to some work. They froze. Then, as if sensing danger, my mother-in-law stammered. And no, thank you. Don't worry, my brother said, his voice too cheerful. It's legitimate work. And considering your situation, you're not in a position to be picky. We can't work. My father-in-law mumbled. My brother's smile dropped. Funny, he said. You came here demanding money, yet now you think you have the right to refuse a job? With no other choice, my in-laws reluctantly followed him out. See you later, my brother said as he led them away. I had expected this outcome the moment I heard my brother was coming. His company specializes in hiring problematic people. They provide housing and jobs, but their methods are strict. Company apartments are old, some leak when it rains. People work hard, sometimes crying through it. But for those with nowhere else to go, it's a lifeline. I exhaled and made coffee. As I handed cups to my parents, we finally sat down to talk. They'll be fine, my father said. His company is strict but fair, my mother added. If they work properly, they might even turn into decent people. I raised an eyebrow. Still feels too lenient for what they did to Daniel, I muttered. According to my brother's later report, my in-laws cried every day at work. Their assigned apartment was one of the worst: leaky roof, peeling walls. Whatever they earned went straight to paying debts. For the first time, I also learned something new. My father-in-law had a gambling problem. Left unchecked, he would have thrown away every cent. Now, he couldn't even afford to gamble. And with no money to waste, they had become obedient. Meanwhile, I was moving forward. My new house was being built. Work was going great. Life felt smooth. Of course, I still missed Daniel. Sometimes I caught myself talking to him in my head. And on those nights, I swore I could almost hear him answering. But I wasn't alone. With friends, family, and my colleagues, I was finally living happily.